Do you remember playing hide and seek as a kid? Well, building a data inventory is the adult version of that kid's game. No, really, seriously. Think of the person hiding, being an employee or perhaps yourself, as you look for all the hidden kids, or in this scenario, all the personal data in your organization. Granted, it might not be as much fun, but the goal is to find your friend, or in this case, find the personal data that the organization is processing. In other words, what personal data does your organization collect, use, publish, modify, view, access, share, store, and in some cases, sell? Welcome back to the Privacy PowerUp series. I'm Paul Iagnocco, and I lead the customer enablement group here at TrustArc. So, why create a data inventory? Well, there are actually several benefits to doing this. Number one, it helps identify both the personal data inflowing and outflowing from your organization. Number two, it identifies the type, the classification, and the sensitivity associated with that personal data that is being processed in or out of your organization. Number three, it provides critical data that your IT or InfoSec team needs in order to assess the risk associated with the processing and the potential exposure of this personal data. Number four, once you've completed steps 1 through 3, your IT and InfoSec team can implement the appropriate and necessary measures or controls to properly secure and protect these data through their data lifecycle. And then in finally 5, probably what you were expecting up front, completing a data inventory is often needed to comply with some privacy law or regulation. For example, Europe's GDPR Article 30 or California's CCPA Section 1798.130. In each of these situations, there's a call out for the need of a data inventory or something of that sort. However, that is not always the case, but it is often something we would highly recommend because it helps you identify exactly what data is inflowing and outflowing in your organization. So think of it in the game we were just playing. This would be like all the kids hiding and no one going after and seeking. So, what are the steps to building out a data inventory? Number one, the step I view as the most critical, and that is kind of stop and do some planning. Number two, there's the actual build out, the doing the work itself. Number three is assessing the risk associated with your findings, and where appropriate or necessary, do some remediation. And four, the last thing is obviously you want to use it. So we need to publish it as well as be prepared to demonstrate should you be tapped on the shoulder by some authority. So let's break this down. So stop and plan. First, and I believe most important, you need to understand what is the goal for this data inventory. And you may be asking yourself, what do you mean, what goal? I need to find the information. Well, there are two ways of looking at this. Number one, are you solving for just privacy needs? Which, as we know, is a very narrow remit of requirements. Or are you solving for IT and IS needs or requirements, which are often very broad, include all data, not just personal data, and also include structured, unstructured, categorized, uncategorized data throughout the entire organization. Very different approaches between privacy and that of ITIS. So the question is, again, what are you solving for? Number two, What is the current state of maintaining this personal data? How is it handled today? Who knows about it? How is it generated? Next question would be, can existing processes, especially those that are often found in procurement, contract negotiations, where a lot of this information is initially sourced, be leveraged their current process, or do we need to come up with a whole new way of maintaining this? And then, of course, with anything in our organizations that has changed, what are those implications? Next, who owns the data? Sometimes it's a very tricky and difficult situation to nail down because often people only see what's right in front of them. They can't see to left or right. They only know what they're inputting on the screen. So a little bit more of that seeking that needs to be done. If we were to jump forward after this build out, we need to again ask the question, how does the organization keep this current? Is the process, is the means, what we have collected all sustainable? Does your organization have the structure, the process, the people in place to maintain a quote unquote living data inventory? Step two, the build out. Depending on how you answer the goal question above regarding this data inventory, you may have different answers below. For our purposes, let's just assume we're solving for the data privacy area only. The first thing you want to do is identify those business activities, internal, external, that are basically touching processing personal data. And this will vary depending on the nature of your organization. In business to business functions, typically the personal data risk are associated with your human resources functions, your financial functions, payroll, all those things that are touching benefits. This is often where you need to look for these personal business activities within the B2B environment. For business to consumer, not only do you have what I just mentioned, but you now expanded into more of the focus in on consumers, right? You're looking at what is marketing doing in this case? Are they doing email, social media? What are they collecting in promotions and so forth? And then, of course, there's hybrids in between, right? That may be doing one and a little bit of the other type of thing. The other important thing next up would be who are the data owners? They're subject matter experts, if you will. Once you've identified those, I think it is always critical, in my experience, to be open and transparent about the time commitment and the expectation that you have for these individuals, as well as their leadership. I cannot stress that enough, right? We're all busy people. You need to appease the leadership and make sure that they clearly understand what the remit is here in the minimal time required to get what you need. What leadership often reacts negatively to is the unknown, right? And that this may go on for a long period of time and be very disruptive to the priorities of their particular function for this individual. So head that off from the get-go. Talk to the leadership, be open, be transparent. Next up, obviously, we need to collect the data. There are a variety of means to do this today. Typically, we see interview processes. A lot of people use survey type instruments to gather information. Others are using some automated formats of data discovery or scanning tools. Just a caution on that. Not all of those tools can identify some of the requirements that you need to find for privacy specific purposes. Yeah, they can find the data, but think about this for a moment. Can they understand and find what's the purpose for the collection? How about what's the legal basis or the legal means and approval you have in order to collect and transfer whatever that personal data? It's not going to find all of those details. So go in eyes wide open. It will do some, maybe a majority, but you're still going to need to touch some aspect that they cannot automatically discover through these tools. Next, you need to kind of review and approve and look at the completeness of the business activity and the processing of that personal data. Remember, let's focus in on what is required first, right? Going back to the regulations, what is it that they're requiring us to have? That's the data we want to go after. We can always embellish it later. Remember, this is a living document. It is always going to need to be updated on an ongoing basis as needed. Next, you need to kind of validate that content and perhaps even develop a data flow map. Now, data flow maps are not a required element in the privacy area. However, they are incredibly helpful for many to understand the complexity in these processing activities. So I do encourage it, but again, they are optional. They are not required. Step 3, assess risk and remediate. It is important at this point to review and assess the level of risk associated with your business activities as they have been inputted into the data inventory. So you need to start asking some questions, particularly questions that are engaging in what is classified as high-risk business activities. For example, a high-risk business activity is any personal data crossing international borders, particularly if we're talking about from Europe or the UK to the United States. Another area to take a look at, is there any automated scoring being done? In other words, scoring that is being done without human intervention. We've all experienced it online. We go put in some numbers and it's gonna automatically give you a yes, no within 10 to 15 seconds. That's likely to be all automated. There's no human interfacing going on. So think about any of your applicant screenings or your financial, if you're in the financial sector, some of the financial scoring that is done there in order to get a loan or not. These are all considered high risk behaviors. Another one, of course, the new kid on the block, artificial intelligence of any sort. You need to be cognizant that there's a lot of scrutiny here. And more importantly, it requires some additional due diligence. So be prepared to dig in and understand how they're using artificial intelligence. Next, collecting in special categories of data under EU's GDPR. So anything that is dealing with ethnicity or race or religion, political affiliations, all of these things are highly sensitive or classified as special categories of data in the EU. So be cognizant of those. The other areas to be concerned with that are likely to be high risk, any medical data, including biometrics. So think about if you have actual physical buildings and fingerprint technology that we're using for entrance into secure areas, as well as particularly in the financial area, we're seeing a lot of use of facial ID technology, right? The whole app, if you will, that recognizes your face and opens up that particular area of the app. So all those things that I just mentioned are classified as high risk today in our businesses. Once you have a group of these activities, you now need to proceed to do some level of a risk-based assessment, if you will, and sort these processes by, is it classified as a high risk? Maybe it's a medium risk, but maybe it's a low risk, right? You'll need to determine what those are, type of thing, and spell those out of what the actions are, should they be falling into one of those three categories. If they're all high and medium risk activities, those all need to be further assessed. That is a norm and a standard. And you need to reduce that inherent risk or the risk that is associated before you do anything, right? It's what the risk is as it stands. And then you try to establish a target residual risk, or what are you willing to accept a risk to be after you've done some level of remediation. Next, after you complete those assessments, often these are, privacy impact assessments, or commonly called PIAs. You do these with the subject matter experts and the data owners. You review that PIA, you look at it for compliance gaps, of course. You look at if there's any way you can alter things and reduce the overall risk and exposure if that personal data did get exposed, the ramifications associated with that. You may ask yourself, does the organization even need to collect this? Does it really needed to be a part of your current and immediate need and purpose? Is there a way to maybe mask the identity here to basically minimize that exposure? And then lastly, for this section, we need to finally document our assessment activities and the results for potential requests by any authority. Remember, it is much more important to be able to demonstrate what you are doing daily than just a snapshot in time. So if you think that just doing this assessment and putting it away for historical purposes is enough, you're kind of missing the point here. Data inventories and the subsequent nature of them and the requirements is an ongoing, living document as well as process. Step 4, final stage, publish and demonstrate. We're almost done. At this point, you need to collect all those findings, publish your data inventory so it now can be used throughout the organization. Now, how in what way you collect and publish is completely up to you. For smaller businesses, they have very limited data inventories. A simple spreadsheet is probably effective. However, there's a lot of rule making going on, a lot of changes going on that are unknown. What I can tell you, it's going to get more complex. And with that complexity will likely be the need to leverage some form of software because of this constant change and so forth. And particularly if you are having constant change in a specific business activity, for instance, common one, it would be in marketing promotions, right? There's constant change going on there. It's likely to be a lot easier to use software to manage that constant change than trying to use a simple spreadsheet. Lastly, as discussed in this planning stage, subject matter experts or business activity owners need to keep this content current and accurate. So whether you're using a spreadsheet that needs to be in some sort of shared drive, or you're using software that could be accessed from different points, whether it's email or directly in a tool, whatever is needed, anytime there's a change in any aspect of the activity, it needs to be reflected so that it remains current. Congratulations. Going back to our game, you found all those hiding from you, the seeker. That's all for this segment of the Privacy PowerUp series. If you haven't already, I encourage you to go back and watch the previous videos in this series that cover the following topics: getting started in privacy and data collection, minimalization, retention, deletion, and necessity. Next up, to help you power up, is individual rights, or otherwise known as data subject rights. Thanks for watching.